Hello student, this is Professor Harmony Kim and this record is Week 4 lecture. Last week, you studied Xuanzang's travel from China to India. So, the red arrow indicates the route from China to India and the blue arrow indicates the route to return to China. In the course of the travel from China to India, we look into some cities such as Kucha, Bark, Bamiyan, and Kapisa. In those cities, Xuanzang stay at the monasteries and collect Buddhist texts or treasures. Those cities belong to the Central Asia. Now, let's follow several sites in India where Xuanzang visit and have a debate with other religious leaders and collect the Sanskrit text and even the pathway of returning to China. Do you remember this sculpture found in Kapisa? When a young man took homage to Dipankara Buddha by offering his long hair as a carpet for the Dipankara Buddha's feet. Here you can see the foot. Dipankara Buddha predicted Gautama Siddhartha as the Buddha to be in the future. There's another city named Jalalabad. Jalalabad located between Kapisa and Taxila. So somewhere here between Kapisa and Taxila, there is Jalalabad. Jalalabad was the setting of the one of a famous legend of the Shakyamuni Buddha. In a former existence, this Buddha had met the Dipankara Buddha and received the prediction of his own Buddhahood. King Asoka had built a stupa 300 feet tall to mark the place where the Buddha-to-be had met his distant predecessor, Dipankara Buddha. The area of Jalalabad have yielded rich archaeological treasures. One of them is a round box of pure gold treasure. This one, round box, is all made up of pure gold and inlaid with rubies, RUBIES, kinds of jewelry, which had been a container for Buddhist relics. Even this box was enclosed in turn in a stone box in the ruin of a stupa found near Jalalabad. This treasure depicts a standing Buddha, here, standing Buddha, flanked by two attendants. One is Brahma and Indra. Brahma and Indra, they are Indian gods who were incorporated into the Buddhist pantheon. Now, Xuanzang is traveling in India. Once entering India, Xuanzang mentioned that the priests were few and Xuanzang depicted the local inhabitants as being full of respect for the Buddha. But there was something puzzling about this rich area of pilgrimage by stating that the monasteries are many, but yet the priests are few, the stupa are desolate and ruined. So Xuanzang observed that sort of decline of Buddhism in India. To the north and east of Peshawar, Peshawar is this region. Here, around this region, also between just southeast to Kapisa. Xuanzang searched for the famous stupa that commemorated Jataka tales of the Buddha's good deed in his past lives. Many of the stories characteristic of early Buddhism were adapted from the popular culture to point up certain moral truth. So early Buddhism stressed morality. Jataka stories told of unbelievable sacrifice and often depicted absolute piety for all creatures. For example, how the Buddha gave his eyes for charity. This time you can see this paint. The legend describes how the Buddha, the person who lies down is Buddha, how the Buddha sacrificed his body so that a tiger could feed her baby. Xuanzang was happy to pinpoint these tales of the former Buddhas. Xuanzang would see the same stories repeated over and over again, engraved in stone, or painted on monastery walls in Greater India. And the copy of this painting could be found as far away as the Dunhuang caves in China. Xuanzang left Peshawar to India in the Swat Valley. Swat Valley is about this region. Xuanzang found some region in the Swat Valley, and that region is neglected state with only a few monks remaining. These few monks were Mahayana Buddhists who occupied themselves with silent meditation, and they were clever at reciting their books without penetrating the deep meaning. They lived strictly according to their rules and were specially expert in magical exorcism. Of the Deva temples, there were above 10 and various sectarians lived pell-mell. Pell-mell means some state in a confused or disorderly manner. Xuanzang did not condemn these practices, and Xuanzang brought back the Sutra of 11-faced Avalokiteshvara and other sutras containing spells for charming holy water, spells for incense, spells for firewood, medicinal herb, and so on. Xuanzang was among the first to introduce esoteric text to China. Xuanzang seems far more open to a wide range of Buddhist belief and practice than might be expected. Apocryphal texts means some texts are doubtable in authenticity from the sacred books accepted as genuine. He also was not reluctant to bring these kinds of apocryphal texts to China. Xuanzang was also fascinated by Indian logic and studied systematic treatises dealing with logic which were almost unknown in China. India produced many systems of logic and many forms of syllogistic reasoning. Syllogistic reasoning means, for example, all dogs are animals. All animals have 4 legs. Therefore, all dogs have 4 legs. This kind of thought process, we call that syllogistic reasoning. The old logic of Vasubandhu and Asanga laid down detailed rules for conducting a debate. The new logic, said to have been founded by Dignaga in the late 5th century CE, simplified the set form in which an argument was to be stated. It also enumerated and defined valid and invalid inferences, means of proof, etc. This well appeared in the famous 33 Fallacies. Here's a typo, 33 Fallacies. This means when Dignaga had a debate with other religious leaders, he used valid means of knowledge. What kind of reason, what kind of method he used to debate against other faith. In other words, other religious leaders, they do not know about Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. Those are Buddhist principles. So other religious leaders, they do not know about that. So Dignaga just put what is the valid means of knowledge to prove the truth. So Dignaga proposed pratyaksa and anumana for debate. I'm not going to that area in this class, but in India, there was some strong logical debate occur between religious leaders. And one of them was Dignaga, and he used valid means of knowledge. A few Indian texts had been translated into Chinese, but the new logic was Xuanzang's special gift to China. The rules of logic, common laws of thought, were necessary for these grand scholastic tournaments between men of differing faith, such as Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, who would put their case before powerful rulers who might become their patrons. Once religious leaders won in debate, then they can obtain royal patronage. Xuanzang's experience in Kashmir was a foretaste of what he would find in 7th century India, such as an increasing emphasis in Buddhism on intellectualism and metaphysical inquiry. In terms of Buddhist logic, Xuanzang was pleased to study with a northern Indian prince named Vinitaprabha. The prince Vinitaprabha was an authority on one of the two surviving texts of the New Logic. Xuanzang had also written commentaries on Mahayana Buddhism, including one of 30 verses. That treatise was by Vasubandhu, who was one of the founders, along with Asanga, the school of Yogacara idealism. Yogacara school was founded by Vasubandhu and Asanga. An immense body of literature has grown up around these 30 verses. Summing up the doctrine of idealists, the philosophy that was closest to Xuanzang's own personal sympathies. The brothers Asanga and Vasubandhu has composed their sutras and expounds Yogacara idealism in the 5th century CE. The Yogacara school put forth the slogan such as mind only. So mind only is the slogan of Yogacara school. In this mind only philosophy, it would seem that external reality becomes a dream, mirage, and cloud. Yogacara actually means the practice of yoga. You know about the yoga, yogic person. So from the meaning of practice of yoga, we move from idealist philosophy into the world of mysticism. Xuanzang himself tells the legend of how Asanga went to the Tushita heaven at night. In Tushita heaven, the Maitreya dictated to Asanga the Sanskrit text, now known as the Treatise on the Stage of Yoga Practice. Scholars surmise that, in fact, Asanga received the words from a historical person, presumably his teacher, who happened to bear the name of Maitreya. So scholars kinds of doubt. It's not feasible. Master, jump or fly, go up to Tushita heaven and learn Sanskrit text from Maitreya. It's more like a mystical story. So scholars think that Asanga received the word from historical person whose name is Maitreya. But it's very hard to prove which story is correct. Xuanzang was already in the India, but Xuanzang is entering the core part of India. Therefore, at last, Xuanzang was approaching the true holy land of the Buddha. Let's follow the site which Xuanzang went as a pilgrim, and these sites are associated with the main event of the Buddha's life. At Lumbini, Xuanzang would celebrate the Buddha's birth as a joyous pilgrim. Here is the Lumbini. At Bodhigaya, here is Bodhigaya, Xuanzang would weep with profound emotion under the tree of the Buddha's enlightenment. And at Sarnath, Xuanzang would have a replica made of the famous teaching Buddha. So Buddha teach the middle way in Deer Park at Sarnath. And Kushinaga, somewhere in this region, Xuanzang would remember a tree at the grove where the Buddha died. Sravasti, here, was the site of the great miracle at Jetavana Monastery. There were huge monastery named Jetavana Monastery at Sravasti. Xuanzang reported that near Jetavana Park, King Prasenajit held a magic contest between the Buddha and 6 leaders of various religious sect. The Buddha had overwhelmed them all. How and what the Buddha has done? Flames issued from the Buddha's shoulders and streams of water coming from Buddha's feet, and this symbolized the Buddha's victory over fire and water. An even more popular miracle is that of the Buddha multiplying himself thousands of times. The Buddha stays at Sravasti for the rainy retreat during 25 years. Another additional interesting site was Vaisali. Here, in Vaisali, Vimalakirti had lived. Who is Vimalakirti? Vimalakirti was a lay follower of the Buddha who lived at Vaisali. Vimalakirti had a special attraction for the Chinese because Vimalakirti had been the symbol of the lay householder and yet had been capable of defeating Manjushri. Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom in Tibet. So Vimalakirti and Manjushri had a debate and Vimalakirti won over Manjushri. And Manjushri is the bodhisattva of wisdom. And Vimalakirti, even not a monk, is just lay follower of the Buddha, just a lay householder. So Chinese think that even lay householder can become enlightened. The Vimalakirti legend inspired many paintings and pieces of sculptures in Dunhuang caves. This figure is also found in Dunhuang cave. The Vimalakirti legend had been the subject of popular stories and ballad. Xuanzang himself had made a translation of the Vimalakirti Sutra, which was well known in China. Vaisali was the site where Vimalakirti lived, as well as Vaisali was the site where the second Buddhist council was held. Do you remember from the Second Buddhist Council, early Buddhism was divided into several sects, which shows the beginning of the Mahayana school. After touring the nearby holy cities, Xuanzang went to Nalanda, and Xuanzang was able to hear his master. The name of his master was the Venerable Silabhadra. Xuanzang can hear his lecture on the basic Yogacara scriptures. From his master, Xuanzang could learn the pure tradition handed down from master to pupil, beginning with Asanga to Vasubandhu. Asanga and Vasubandhu, they both had come to Nalanda. Next, in the train after these two luminaries of the Yogacara school was Dignaga, founder of the New Logic, who in turn trained Dharmapala. Dharmapala was the head of Nalanda monastery before Xuanzang's arrival. Finally, there was Silabhadra, who was the pupil of Dharmapala and succeeded him. And this Silabhadra had greeted Xuanzang with such joy and accepted Xuanzang as his pupil. The Venerable Silabhadra expounded on the stage of yoga practice no fewer than 3 times. Xuanzang listened carefully to each exposition. Also, Xuanzang attended courses in grammar, logic, and Sanskrit, and these kinds of education helped Xuanzang translate the Buddhist scriptures for 19 years once he returned to China. So there was some master and pupil system. In India, for example, Asanga and Vasubandhu, they both came to Nalanda University. They were the master of Dignaga, and pupil of Dignaga was Dharmapala. Dharmapala was the head of Nalanda monastery before Xuanzang's arrival, and pupil of Dharmapala was Silabhadra. So you can see master-pupil relationship in India. Several thousand monks live at the monastery university, and the monks studied Mahayana Buddhism and 18 schools of early Buddhism, Vedas, logic, medicine, mathematics, astrology, and Sanskrit. The left panel shows the image of Master Xuanzang at the Xuanzang Memorial in Nalanda. So if you visit Nalanda University, you can see this statue, because Xuanzang stayed at Nalanda and studied and even gave lectures. Here's 18 sects of early Buddhism, means early Buddhism started to divide into 18 branches of early Buddhism, and each branch of early Buddhist school explore their principles, and some of them eventually merged into Mahayana Buddhism. The Venerable Silabhadra asked Xuanzang to give some lectures on idealist text. Xuanzang did so, and also Xuanzang wrote a 3,000 stanza treatise called the Treatise on the Harmony of Teaching. Xuanzang found that there were some texts that were unknown to his Indian colleague, such as the Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana and the famous Heart Sutra. The Venerable Silabhadra chose Xuanzang and engaged in a dispute with a Hindu Brahmin. From debate with a Hindu Brahmin, Xuanzang was victorious in the debate and composed the Destruction of Heresy, refuting Hindu argument. In 642 CE, Xuanzang lectures occasionally and devoted himself to writing a treatise called On the Harmony of True Principles, or Non-Difference between Madhyamika and Yogacara. In it, he tried to reconcile the idealist school that sprang from the two great idealists Asanga and Vasubandhu and the school of the middle way of the skeptic Nagarjuna. So, Madhyamika school was founded by Nagarjuna. Yogacara school was founded by Asanga and Vasubandhu. There seems some difference between two schools, but Xuanzang attempted to show that there was no significant difference between believing that mental happenings alone are real, such as idealism, and believing that the only reality is the wisdom that consists in denying all reality, proposed by Prajna school. So Yogacara school proposed mental happenings alone are real, and Madhyamika school proposed denying all reality. But when you go into deep, Xuanzang attempted to show that there was no significant difference between two schools. Xuanzang traveled to the west coast of the India, today modern Bombay. So from here, Nalanda, Xuanzang traveled to this west coast of the India, this region. So Bombay, located somewhere here. He captures the monumentality of Ajanta. "30 rock caves had been cut into a scarp of horseshoe-shaped cliff." So you can see here, horseshoe-shaped cliff. Inside Ajanta Hall, religious ceremonies or meetings of the Sangha were held or worshipped at a sanctuary with a stupa or a solid figure of the Buddha at the end. You can see the sculpture of the Buddha and you can see entire stupa. This monastery has been identified with the magnificent caves of Ajanta and its famous rock temples. Can you see this magnificent ceiling and this pillar? The Indian monks' retreats were usually located near ancient trade route because salt, S-A-L-T, along the coast, these routes passed from the western seaport near Bombay. Xuanzang mentioned that the logician Dignaga stayed much in this place. Who is Dignaga? I briefly mentioned in previous slide. Dignaga composed his classic The Treatise on Logic. Dignaga is Buddhist logician. Xuanzang gave an account of the legend of how Dignaga listened to the advice of Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, and this story meant to show how Dignaga gave up Hinayana, early Buddhism, when Dignaga listened to the Bodhisattva. So in India, there was movement transferring early Buddhism, such as Hinayana, to Mahayana Buddhism by studying Asanga, Vasubandhu, Dignaga, even Nagarjuna. In Ajanta cave, you can see painting as well as the sculpture and stupa. So Xuanzang indeed visit Ajanta and see the splendid wall paintings. One of them is the Bodhisattva of the Blue Lotus on the wall of cave number 1 at Ajanta cave. So you can see here's blue lotus flower. This Bodhisattva hold blue lotus, and this painting was found on the wall of cave 1. It represents the perfect peace and tranquility of the Bodhisattva's face. After visiting Ajanta cave, Xuanzang returned Nalanda University again. Then Xuanzang made up his mind to return to China. When the monks at Nalanda heard about Xuanzang's leaving, they begged Xuanzang to remain and said that India was the place of the Buddha's birth, and the sacred traces of the Buddha were in India, not in China. Then Xuanzang elaborated the reasons for his return like this. I have visited and adored the sacred vestiges of our religion and heard the profound exposition of the different schools. My mind has been overjoyed, and my visit here has been of the utmost profit. I desire now to go back and translate and explain to others that I've heard, so as to cause others also to be equally grateful to you in bearing and understanding these things. And for this reason, I am unwilling to delay my return and remain in India. However, Xuanzang was concerned about his return because of loss of images and sacred text he liked to bring back. Then one day at Nalanda, Xuanzang met a fortune teller. It was the end of 642 century CE, an ordinary day, a day like any other. One day before the king of Assam's messenger arrived, a naked Jain came named Vajra unexpectedly walked into Xuanzang's room at Nalanda. Knowing that Jains are famous for their fortune-telling skill, Xuanzang asked the fortune teller a serious question, such as, should I return immediately? Should I stay longer in India? Will I get back safely? How much longer am I going to live? Here's another typo. This should be am I going to live? The Jain diviner gave the kind of answers that could be construed in several ways. However, when Xuanzang told him that he had collected so many sacred images and texts that he did not know how he can carry them back to China, the fortune teller gave Xuanzang some interesting information. King Harsha and kind Kumara of Assam will supply you with transport. Then Xuanzang objected, but I have never met either of them. Oh, I'm sorry, here's another typo. Sorry. And Xuanzang keeps saying, there's no reason for either of them to do me such a kindness. Then fortune teller replied, don't be anxious. The diviner then told Xuanzang that both kings would dispatch escort for him and that he would successfully return without accident. Xuanzang had decided not to return by sea route. So Xuanzang and his party turned to the northwest. His party means Xuanzang's caravan had been joined by 100 priests who were carrying scriptures and images, and they were glad to have the protection of numbers as they made their way through robber-infested passes. So some reason there is a thief and robbers, they can attack Xuanzang's parties, but this priest and guide can protect Xuanzang's way to return to China. They cross northern India by way of Taxila. Here is Taxila. And Xuanzang was returning in the opposite direction by roughly the same route Xuanzang had taken 13 years before. So just follow the red arrow backward. However, when they were ready to cross Indus River, a storm springs up while they were in the middle of the mile-wide Indus River. Indus River was shaking the boat and nearly overturning them. 50 of his precious manuscripts and all his flower seed fall into the water. Eventually, against all the odds, Xuanzang crossed the Hindu Kush and Pamir ranges, stopped at Kashgar Oasis here, and waited at the Khotan Oasis here for the arrival of replacement copies of some of the scriptures he had lost in the Indus River. In Khotan, so once Xuanzang and his party crossed the Indus River, then he lost many his belongings. Therefore, Xuanzang just stay and wait in Khotan to retrieve his lost scriptures and images. In Khotan, there were 100 monasteries and more than 5,000 monks, chiefly Mahayanist. Xuanzang found evidence of Indian influence at Khotan. The king himself claimed to be a descendant of Vaisravana. Vaisravana is a Buddhist deity of northern India. The Khotan people ascribe their conversion to Mahayana Buddhism to Vairochana. Vairochana is the Indian Buddha of Tantric and Esoteric Buddhism. And this Tantric and Esoteric Buddhism continue to explore in Tibetan Buddhism later. In Khotan, Xuanzang lectured to the king and his people on his old favorite, the treatise on the stage of Yogacara practice and treasury of Buddhist philosophy, written by Vasubandhu. And also Xuanzang lectured to the king a famous compendium of Mahayana philosophy translated by Paramartha in 562 CE. Now, Xuanzang received his lost belongings from Indus River and moved forward to China, Chang'an. Before arriving at Chang'an, Xuanzang rested at the Dunhuang Oasis. So here is Dunhuang Oasis. So before finally Xuanzang arrived at Chang'an, Xuanzang stopped off at Dunhuang. Xuanzang is likely to have paused before some of the fine paintings and sculptures of the impressive shrine, library, and gallery of Buddhist art at the Cave of Thousand Buddhas. In Dunhuang Cave, there is painting drawing thousands Buddhas. Xuanzang probably saw many of cave interiors and read some of the inscription of merchants who contribute funds out of gratitude for successful journey or in the hopes that their caravans would arrive safely at their destination. So in Dunhuang Cave, merchants heard about the Buddhist story, and those stories reflected on the painting inside the Dunhuang Cave. Dunhuang was the gateway to one of the oldest long-distance trade route in history, the Silk Road. The animal camel and horse caravans from India and the Turfan Basin in Central Asia in one direction, and from Chang'an in the other direction. Regardless of both directions, all stopped in Dunhuang. Several Dunhuang paintings on silk banners depicted the prototype of pilgrim travelers. There are many caves in Dunhuang, and the number 17, the opening of cave number 17 in the early 19th century, you can see 30,000 manuscripts, and 20,000 other artifacts including paintings on silk and paper, banners, and embroideries, was beyond belief. Later, a copy of what is one of the world's earliest documented printed book, the Diamond Sutra, also found. This Diamond Sutra was dated 868 CE. So in Cave 17, this archaeologist found lots of manuscript and artifact. Once he arranged these manuscript, and behind this pile up of manuscript, there was a statue. How you can prove this is the same room? Can you look at the painting on the wall? And then this part and this part are same. So right now in left panel, you can see many manuscripts. But behind this pile up of manuscript, there was Buddha statue. There was no evidence these many manuscripts were brought by Xuanzang. However, it is true Xuanzang brought a wealth of Buddhist texts from India to China. The Buddhist text brought to China by Indian missionaries and Chinese pilgrims were not initially systematized. Over time, people became unsure how to resolve seemingly discrepancies between sutras and how to practice the teachings in these vast treasures of literatures. So the collected manuscript has not been systematized. Thus, in the 7th century, there were spontaneous attempts in China to organize the Buddhist teachings. Several groups grew up around various monks, and each of monks chose a particular sutra or groups of sutra as the central point of their study and practice. These groups later evolved and became Buddhist tradition, each one passed down by its own lineage of masters. 8 major traditions developed in China, as well as some minor ones. What are those 8 major traditions or 8 principal schools in China? First, Sanlun school. They followed the Madhyamika midway philosophy. Fashang school followed the Yogacara philosophical school of Indian Buddhism. Saryasiddhi school, just Theravada school, tradition. Huayan, based on the Avatamsaka Sutra and dealt with an array of metaphysical concepts for contemplation. Tiantai school took the Lotus Sutra as foremost and presented a balance between meditation, philosophical study, and good deed. Third period school stressed a method for purification based on a strict observance of monastic vows and charitable actions. Chan school emphasized meditation and the Lankavatara Sutra. Pure Land school practitioners strove to be reborn in the pure lands of Amitabha Buddha or Maitreya Buddha. So next time we will study what are the characteristics of each Chinese school and which Chinese school survive up to now. All 8 Chinese schools cannot survive up to now. We will study what are the main characteristics of certain Chinese school based on what sutra and their ideas, their Buddhist ideas, and the method of practice. And also, we will study how this Chinese tradition can influence to transmit Buddhism to Korea and Japan. Quiz: which of the following sites in India has the Buddha fully enlightened, fully awakened? So you know the 4 sites and what kind of event occur in each site during the Buddha's life. What is the meaning of Yogacara? Yoga, what is the meaning of yoga? Yogacara. Which of the following sutra tells the Buddha's deeds in his previous life? Before the Buddha fully awakened, the Buddha was a bodhisattva. As a bodhisattva, in his previous life, how the Buddha behaved, and which sutra describe the Buddha's deed. You can find the answer from the lecture. Same routine way. This is your attendance, so please send the answer of week 4 quiz as you've done same way in the previous week. And include your email address, title subject, week 4 quiz or week 4 assignment, or just write down week 4, and you must write down your official name, last name, comma, first name, and please write the answer of a quiz. This is the end of lecture, week 4.